Hey guys, what is up? It is the Fast Break Report here, bringing you guys another vlog, and we have a spicy update in the Paul George intriguing Indiana Pacers situation here, because I'm gonna be honest with you boys, the waters are rough over in the Los Angeles Clippers front office, okay? I'm just gonna let you know, okay? Like, I suspected for a while, like, Paul George and the Clippers were nowhere near close on a contract extension because obviously he hadn't signed an extension since Kawhi signed one. I kind of expected that, you know, Kawhi would sign an extension and then Paul George would get a similar extension and Harden would be the guy to take a pay cut and come back, right? Here's the problem with that though, okay? Even though the Clippers do have the bird rights to Paul George and James Harden, they've already re-signed Kawhi Leonard. Like, I think that was a given. There was no way they were going to let Kawhi Leonard walk, especially after the season he's having this year. Granted, injury-prone dude, but nevertheless is playing his ass off, okay? I know I have him on my fantasy team this year. But, okay, Paul George has officially worked his way into basically the odd man out role on the Clippers, where he's basically the third wheel, essentially. He's that Kevin Love, Chris Bosh level guy now for the Clippers, where Harden's doing all the work, Kawhi's doing all the work, and Paul George is getting the scraps where he can at this point when it comes to playing ball. Okay? Granted, Paul George still has his nights, but the fact of the matter is, like, I think the Clippers made the James Harden trade assuming Paul George would take less money. Now, here's the problem. Okay, this is the problem. James Harden left the 76ers because Daryl Morey did not give him a max contract extension. Okay, James Harden wanted it. James Harden seemed to think he was worth that. And now, when it came time to pay the bills, Daryl Morey said, "Go fuck yourself." And James Harden said, "Well, go fuck yourself too. Trade me to another team." The problem is now, okay, Paul George wants his bread. Okay, Paul George is 33. Paul George wants a shot at winning, and if I'm not going to get a shot at winning, at least pay me an ass ton of money, right? Well, it seems as if that has not been the case, and I have a feeling, okay, Paul George is going to find his way out of LA and find some way to become an Indiana Pacer. I just don't know how, but we recently got a thing on Twitter, like I said, where Paul George was interviewed, and they asked him about the contract extension, and he said, you know, is it a goal to resign here? He said, that's the goal. And then once they asked about an update on it, he just said, that's the goal. So I'm assuming Paul George wants a set amount. I think I'm assuming he wants the same thing that Kawhi Leonard got, because that's what the reports are. That's what Adrian Wojnarowski reported, saying that they expected a similar deal for Paul George that Kawhi got. Now, the problem is, I'm going to tell you why that's an issue, okay? The issue is because James Harden with a max contract qualifies for up to 35% of their fucking cap space, and they already signed Kawhi Leonard to a max contract. So you would have two guys, now you're talking potentially a third guy. If they tried to sign all three of them to max contracts, do you realize how absolutely fucked the Clippers would be? Like, I get it, you know, Kawhi, Paul George, and Harden are all playing very well. Harden has somewhat revived his value, but I still don't think teams trust him enough to give him a max contract, and I feel like that's what the Clippers were expecting. I feel like the Clippers thought if they were successful enough that somebody would come back for less money, and that doesn't appear to be the case. I'm just going to call it what it is. It seems like we have trouble in paradise, because James Harden, I don't think, is going to take less money. And now Paul George is like, whoa, hold on. You know, like, I've been here longer than he has. Why are we paying him when, you know, I've been the guy backpacking the fuck out of this franchise when Kawhi sits, and we didn't even have Harden, you know, half a year ago or whatever. At the beginning of the season, he wasn't even on the roster. And just keep it a buck. Like, I understand why Paul George might feel disrespected. That's all I'm saying. Because he's been the guy who, even though he's been injury riddled as well, the thing is, when it's come to backpacking the Clippers and trying to keep their playoff hopes alive and shit like that, Paul George has been the guy, right? Last year as well, Paul George was the guy that was like backpacking this team when Kawhi couldn't play. So, you know, I understand why maybe he wants the money he wants, but I have a feeling this is not going to go the way everyone thinks it is. Even though, like, yeah, okay, they have the bird rights for Harden and Paul George. Let's just say they signed them, right? Let's just say, metaphorically, they were able to sign Paul George and James Harden to a max contract. You got 3 guys taking up roughly, 75, 85% of your cap space? I mean, who the fuck are you going to put out there with him? Fucking Mike Muscala? You know what I'm saying? Like, this is a team that, yes, you can have 3 really good players, but you're going to have the second apron tax bill to deal with. Then you got to put something around these guys. And yes, while you do have 7 guys on your roster, you have Norman Powell, you've got a couple guys that are automatically coming back, but I think the Clippers thought that they were going to sign Kawhi Leonard to a max deal, give James Harden a max deal, and then because Paul George is 33, Paul George would just take less money and continue to play for the team. And somehow I don't think that's happening. I don't believe it. And I have an odd feeling there's going to be a sign and trade in the offseason for Paul George. Now, how does this fit into what the Pacers are trying to do? Well, the thing is, Jalen Smith is on a player option. Now, I'm assuming Jalen Smith is going to decline that player option because he's easily worth more than he's getting fucking paid. Even if we were to try and trade for a guy like Paul George, I really don't know what a trade like that would look like. It would have to be 2 sign-in trades, and I don't know if that's ever been done in NBA history. But the fact of the matter is, Benedict Mathurin's got 3 years left. I mean, Obi Toppin, you know, we don't have Buddy Hield anymore, so it would have to be like a sign and trade of, like, you know, Obi Toppin or Jalen Smith. Those are really the only guys on our roster that we could do that. Pascal Siakam is a possibility, but I have an odd feeling, like, I don't think we traded for Pascal Siakam to not bring him back. The only way that this is really possible is if, like, Pascal Siakam just takes significantly less money to come back, and Paul George takes significantly less money to come to the Pacers. You know, like, and that's given that Paul George declines his player option and decides he wants to be an Indiana Pacer. Or Pascal Siakam takes an ass ton of money and Paul George is just feeling generous. I highly fucking doubt it. And then decides he just wants to come back to the Pacers and play with Tyrese Halliburton so fucking bad that he just says, fuck it, I'll come there for whatever you pay me. But I will say this. Part of me thinks that Paul George, like, you know how they say there's a little bit of truth to every lie, or, you know, something of the business, you know, there's a little bit of truth to every joke. I feel like Paul George's camp put out the idea that he's intrigued by what's going on in Indiana, because I think a part of him really does want to play for the Indiana Pacers. And I feel like this is his way of pressuring the Clippers to give him what he wants. And if they don't give him what he wants, then Paul George will just come to fucking Indiana. He will just decline his player option, become an unrestricted free agent, and come play in Indy with Pascal Siakam and Tyrese Halliburton just for less money. You know, I understand he's 33. And for all I know, like, honestly, Paul George has made his money in his career, right? He's made a lot of money. I assume Paul George wants a shot to win, and Paul George is looking at what we got going on in Indy, and it's like, they're one Paul George away, you know? Like, they're really only one solid 3-and-D player at the wing position who can put up 20 a game away from winning, and when you consider the idea that Tyrese is a pass-first point guard who is also capable of, like, hitting threes and scoring in the clutch and all this other stuff, right? If you're Paul George, it's hard not to look at that situation and go, all right, you know, like, I could go back to that. I could fuck with that, right? They need defense anyway. I'm pretty good at fucking defense. So I really think that this situation's a little more in favor of the Indiana Pacers than people want to admit. I had somebody the other day like bitch to me about bird rights on Twitter, and I didn't even reply to it because I'm like, dude, even if the Clippers have the bird rights to James Harden and Paul George, they've already re-signed Kawhi Leonard. Once they sign James Harden or Paul George or whoever they decide to a max contract and give them what they want, right? Like, and to be fair, okay, the Clippers haven't been this good, like, pre-James Harden. You know what I'm saying? Like, if I'm the Clippers, I'm choosing between Paul George and James Harden, and honestly, like, if you're the Clippers, you can probably live without Paul George. I'm just going to call it what it is. Like, Harden has played so well for them. Like, it's kind of unexpected, to be honest, because I thought Harden's career was kind of over. I didn't think any team would really want him. But, if you're the Clippers, I find it hard to believe that they're going to take Paul George over James Harden. Even though he's been their golden boy in the time that Kawhi Leonard's been out, James Harden has really changed the dynamic of this team. And while you're probably going to take a hit on defense, Paul George is the most expendable guy on that roster. And, if the Pacers could get Paul George, it instantly makes the Pacers a championship contender in the East. Easily, okay? Because now you have a guy that can compete with Boston. A guy that can compete with, Milwaukee and the Sixers, right? Like, at that point, you're legitimately the third best team in the East. And, yeah, Cleveland's playing very well. Miami's always a threat, but when it comes to just pure talent, pure depth, I mean, if the Pacers can intrigue some guys to come back for less money than they're worth for a real championship run, and I'm starting to think Paul George would do that just to maybe even fix his reputation in Indy, because I think Paul George, deep down, really wants to play with Tyrese Halliburton. I think Tyrese Halliburton has worked that on him a little bit outside of what we've seen in the interviews on Podcast P with Paul George. Tyrese Halliburton has been on his podcast more than any other player. And I think they have a great relationship. They're always talking about Indy. So, like, especially on the podcast, like, everything they talk about is pretty much Indiana Pacers based. And, I think to myself, like, Doug McDermott's going to come back a lot cheaper than Buddy Hield will. Even with Doug McDermott, like, Doug McDermott's a guy, like, even just watching his first game, I get he only took one shot, but the defense is clearly a lot better than Buddy Hield. I'm just going to call it what it is. Regardless of what you thought about Doug McDermott, okay, and what you thought about the Doug McDermott trade, Doug McDermott is a better defender than Buddy Hield. I saw that immediately in Game 1. He's shooting the 3 at 43%, so you have a 3-and-D bench guy. We have enough depth. I mean, can you imagine a starting, a defensive starting 5 of Tyrese Halliburton, Aaron Nesmith, Paul George, Pascal Siakam, and Miles Turner? Like, that's pretty fucking good if you ask me. And any defensive lineup you put out there of Paul George and Aaron Nesmith and Pascal Siakam, like, you're gonna be a fucking problem. Like, I'm just gonna call it what it is. Like, that team would be a fucking problem. And I just think to myself, man, I as Pacers fans, it sucks. We kind of got to be patient with this. But I have an odd feeling the Clippers are going to go with James Harden before they go with Paul George. And while it makes sense, the Clippers only have now. Like, the only way I see Paul George going back to that team for significantly less money is if they win a chip at this point. Like, the only way I see either one of those guys taking less money is if they win a chip and decide they want to run it back. But so long as they're not winning a chip, they're going to have to decide between paying James Harden and Paul George. And this offseason, I have a feeling Paul George could potentially be an unrestricted free agent. And if that's the case, Indiana's looking pretty fucking good if you ask me. Like, it's just the idea. Like, also, one thing to consider as well, Paul George would get to play in the East and not the West. Granted, at this point, I feel like the East and the West are kind of the same. But, if you're Paul George, I would have to think like you would like Indiana would forgive Paul George if he came back in free agency. Like I honestly think Pacers fans would forgive him if he decided to re-sign with the Pacers to be a part of a championship run and win a team their first championship ever. And in some ways, I feel like that might mean more to Paul George than money or playing for the Clippers. You know, the idea that you get to be a part of the team that won the Pacers their first championship ever, I think is something that a lot of guys would like to have on their resume. You know what I'm saying? Even a guy like Kevin Durant, even though I understand Kevin Durant is very highly unlikely, Kevin Durant has been wanting to get a ring for a long time. Granted, he's still got a lot of years left on that contract, but you know, it's just the idea, like the Pacers offer an opportunity in the NBA for guys who want to win rings, who haven't yet, to have the ability to say, like, I was the guy that brought that team their first championship ever, right? And there's not a lot of teams you can go to in the NBA and say that, right? Kawhi Leonard's already done that for the Raptors, and you know, James Harden, granted, has never won a ring, so. You know, I just think about it and I'm like, you know, Paul George has a unique opportunity and the Pacers are doing a very good job of putting pieces around Tyrese Halliburton. And I think adding Paul George to that would just be the icing on the cake. So if you guys want, I'll leave the link to that down below in the video description if you guys want to check out that tweet or that clip. Tell me what you guys think about this down below in the comment section below. A like helps me out. Subscribe if you guys want to see more. I'm the Fast Break Report, and I'm out of this motherfucker. Peace, guys.